So there's been lots of discussion about 3D printing as a useful tool for people with disabilities and a way to print assistive technology, but there aren't really a lot of examples of actual people with disabilities actually using this technology in a way that does something that hasn't had another way to get it done. So I learned how to do 3D printing, how to design for 3D printing, so I could print a piece of assistive technology that I needed that didn't exist in the world. And so I'm going to talk about that and why I did that and what worked and what was terrible and what I would do differently if I was going to do it all again. So I do have a theoretical model that I mocked up after the entire process. So these are the steps that I went through on the way to getting my bit of 3D printed assistive technology. So the first thing was to figure out what the problem was. And the problem was pretty obvious. I need to drink a lot because of my disability, and for a lot of the day I'm not left alone. There's no support workers that are available. So we fill up 3 or 4 cups of water and leave beside my bed. And there was 2 problems. The first problem was that it was really easy to knock the cups over. And the second problem was that the cup that was furthest away from me was really difficult to reach. And as my disability seems to keep progressing, reaching the cups that were further away just kept getting more and more difficult. Oh. I got knocked over a lot. And fixing everything after I'd accidentally knocked things over got more and more difficult as well. So I started trying to figure out how to solve this because that's what I do. I think that's life with disability. It's just a long progression of solving really complicated puzzles. Reaching the cups was really hard and the cups kept falling over. So the first idea that I had was that I needed something that would be able to move the furthest away cups so they were closer. And a Lazy Susan seemed like an obvious solution. But the only Lazy Susans I knew of were quite large. So I went around and did lots of Google searching, and it turns out that yes, they do come in all sizes. And I found one that was about 25 centimeters across, I think. And it was pretty good. I could put 4 cups on it and I could spin it around with my fingertips, and then I could reach them all, except, of course, when I moved the Lazy Susan, all the cups fell over. So I'd solved one problem, but the other one was now worse. So I needed to have some construction on top of the Lazy Susan that would hold the cups, up. And there was no really obvious, clear solution. I thought of a lot of things. I thought of buying a piece of PVC that was the right width and cutting cup-sized sections and attaching those to the Lazy Susan. The problem with that was that I needed to find someone who could go to the hardware store for me and someone who could saw the PVC and someone who could sand it and then glue it to the Lazy Susan, and all that seemed kind of overwhelming and a bit much. And one thing that's really hard with my disability is that I feel like I'm always asking everyone for favours. So asking people for favours is something that I try to avoid doing because you burn people out. So I had that idea in the back of my mind, but I didn't really like it very much. Another idea I thought of was to get some wire and to sort of bend the wire into an appropriately cup holding shape. But again, my hands are too weak. I couldn't do that by myself. So that was pretty difficult. So I gave up on that idea. And I thought of getting a piece of sheet metal and making a stand. And I had figured out exactly how it would need to be. And I tried to make a cardboard prototype, but corrugated cardboard is not sufficiently structurally sound to actually do that. So the cardboard would fall apart. And I was thinking about asking my uncle to make like a sheet metal version of what I had made in cardboard, because I thought it would probably actually work. But again, we're back to the problem of asking people for favours all the time. So the biggest thing that was holding me back is the fact that I couldn't make my own prototypes. And that was really frustrating. And another idea that I thought of was to find some Tupperware or similar sort of plastic containers that were approximately the right size and attach those to my Lazy Susan. I had used something similar previous in my disability when I needed cup holders, but I looked and looked and looked on Google, and Google is brilliant for lots of things, but searching by size is not one of them. And I failed to find a single plastic container that was exactly the right size for what I needed. And I thought of 3D printing. And the huge advantage for me of using 3D printing is that I could do it by myself. I knew about the existence of websites such as 3D Hubs, which let me find someone who lives locally who has a 3D printer to do the 3D printing, and I could pay that person a regular market rate. So I wouldn't be asking for a favour, and I wouldn't be sort of playing my disability card. It would just be a regular thing, and I felt much more okay about doing that. And of course the design phase I could do by myself. So the disadvantage of 3D printing at that stage was that I knew that I would have to learn to use the 3D design software, which was pretty intimidating. And also there's a whole culture around 3D printing, and a lot of that culture seems to be exclusively for a certain type of geek, and I don't fit the stereotype of the sort of people that are usually in that culture. So I did find that a bit of a barrier, but I have been an enormous nerd since I was little, so I wasn't too intimidated by that. But I could see that would be more of a barrier for other people with disabilities. So I decided to learn how to use Fusion 360, which is a 3D modelling software which was free to use and available to me. And I won't tell you all of the things I went through because it would take another hour, but it was not as hard to learn to use as I had anticipated. One of the things that helped is that I like to do art, and so I've been using Inkscape to do my art, and that is a 2D vector graphics program, but it turned out that what I'd learned by using Inkscape was quite applicable to the three-dimensional way that Fusion 360 worked. So that helped quite a lot. And I designed the first prototype. At the point where I designed it, I didn't know a whole lot about physical 3D printers because I don't have access to a physical printer myself. So I designed what I thought I would need, and then I realised that it was going to be really hard to get it actually printed because most of the printers that were easily available to me on 3D Hubs only had a bed size of 20 centimetres by 20 centimetres, and what I had designed was larger than 20 centimetres by 20 centimetres. So I thought about that for a while, and what I had was only about 22 centimetres along. So I thought about whether I could shrink it down, and I was thinking about the size of the cup. And can you pick me up a cup? I need a point for this. Is that okay in frame? Okay. So I had my cup, and I was very concerned that it needed to fit in the 3D, into the 20 centimetre bed. And the cup holder is only about this tall. So I thought, can I make each of the two cup holders less than 10 centimetres wide? And I measured my cup at this point, which is where the top of the cup holder was going to be. And I determined that it was less than 10 centimetres, that would be fine. And so I shrunk down my model until it would fit into a 20 centimetre square bed. And of course you can see exactly what I've done wrong here. This part is less than 10 centimetres, but the widest part of the cup is not less than 10 centimetres. So once I put the 4 cups beside each other, they just didn't fit. I had designed a cup holder that was too small for my cups. So I went to the 3D Hub's website with my model, not having realised that it was fatally flawed, and I got it printed. And it was fantastic. The whole process was really easy. It was accessible to me. It turned out there was a person with an appropriate printer living literally less than a block from my house. And so when I explained to him that I would have to send someone else to come and pick it up for me, he offered to drop it round, which was really nice. So that cost around $50 to get my model printed, which, you know, would have been reasonably expensive for a cup holder, but this is super specialised, so I wouldn't have minded. Except, of course, that wasn't the end of the story. So as soon as I saw the cup holder, I realised that I had made a horrible mistake, and we tried to put the cups in it, and of course they didn't fit. You could sort of completely jam them in there, but they weren't even sitting horizontally flat at the bottom. It was terrible. And so I realised that I would have to change the model so that everything was wider. And I realised that I could enlarge it a bit and still fit it in the 20 centimetre bed size. So the first thing I did was enlarge it a bit and do that, and then request for it to be 3D printed again, which of course cost another $50. And actually this model was almost usable. The cups fit in the model. Unfortunately, because I'd got completely fixated and distracted by the 20 centimetre size of the printers, I'd forgotten that I didn't just need to fit the cups in the cup holder, I needed space for my fingers to fit between the cups so that I could pick them up. I had managed to design my model, but I'd completely forgotten important parts about my requirements because I was distracted by the technicality of the software and the 3D printing and going through the whole process. And I was feeling really guilty because this guy had voluntarily walked these models down to me, and also I'd cost myself quite a lot of money and I had nothing useful to show for it. So I went back to thinking about it for a bit, and after a while I realised that there was no actual reason that I had to print this 4-cup holder as one single piece. And that if I broke it into 4 pieces, then I was no longer having any problem at all with the 20 centimetre bed size, because the size of the holder needed for a single cup was much, much smaller. And also I'd learned some things about 3D printing. So instead of making each cup holder square, I made them octagonal because that uses less plastic and you pay by the amount of plastic that you use. So I redesigned everything again, and I asked them to print this piece 4 times. And I also sent a note, because I'd become quite friendly with the guy who had the closest printer, and asked him to glue them together for me, which he very kindly did. And I think it cost about another $50. But this model was fantastic. As soon as I saw it, it was clearly exactly what I needed. The cup holder is absolutely fantastic. I can reach everything really easily. My cups don't fall over. So it's very easy to turn the cups around so that I can reach any cup that I want, and also to pick them up so that I can have a drink. There's no problem with them falling over. You don't have to be careful at all. And it's very light to spin around. An unexpected good part of this was that my support workers can pick up the whole construction to refill the cups. It was quite difficult for one person to pick up 4 cups at once and walk them into the kitchen and then walk them all back. But if they just have to pick up the Lazy Susan with the cups on top, that's much easier for them. So that was an extra nice thing. Okay. For only $150, plus a $20 lazy Susan and about 6 months of effort and angst and thinking about things. I have the world's best cup holder, but there are really a lot of reasons why this sort of 3D printing isn't accessible to most people with disabilities. I had a lot of advantages in this area. Firstly, I'm very good at taking in written information. So the idea of having to read through websites and websites and websites and websites to learn about 3D printing was not really particularly a problem for me. Whereas that's something that a lot of people with disabilities have problems with. I was also familiar with the vector graphics software, so I didn't have too much of a hard time learning Fusion 360, although I still feel very awkward when I use it. I can get the things done that I need to get done. I think learning to use an entire 3D modelling software just so that you can have a little piece of assistive technology is not a reasonable request for most people, even if that person doesn't have an impairment in learning or memory or fine motor control or trouble using a computer. It's still a pretty big ask. Also, with funding models, most people with disabilities don't have $170 to potentially just throw down the drain. I didn't know that I could make this work. So all of the money that I was paying for it as I went along, I was just doing it on faith that I would eventually figure things out. And I had to spend money out of my own pocket because although a funding body might be willing to pay for a specialised cup holder, they won't be willing to pay for the intermediate phase where you're printing things that didn't work. So I might have been able to find a funding body that would fund the $70 that the final model cost. But I had to spend $100, the first $100 to get there. If I didn't have that to spend, then I wouldn't have been able to get to the final correct model. So I'm really glad that I did this experiment because I've been reading about how 3D printing is going to potentially revolutionize assistive technology for years and years, and I had never before really found a thing where it was the best solution. And I still think for me this was probably the best solution, although it wasn't the cheapest one. And I really love my cup holder. It also has social kudos. When I tell people I 3D printed it and I designed it, they're very complimentary, which is nice. And yeah, I'm really glad that I did it. I learned a whole bunch of really useful tools, and I can now talk to other people with disabilities about why 3D printing might or might not work for them, or what it might be good for and not good for, which is really important. I think there's so much hype around this discussion, and pretty much nobody involved as a person with a disability has really got a lot of experience with it. That's not to say there aren't people with disabilities who do 3D printing, because there absolutely are. But as a percentage of people with disabilities in general, it's basically equivalent to zero. There aren't enough people who know what the advantages and the disadvantages are. So I do think that 3D printing has a really awesome future.